Employees with the Department of Education today were given just 30 minutes to return to their office for one last time and pack up all of their things. The employees were given carts like these to wheel out their belongings. We saw countless employees also with suitcases and boxes carrying out their remaining belongings, and many of them streaming out of this office behind me with tears coming down their face.
Yeah, Crimea River. President Trump has finally fulfilled a promise made by every Republican presidential candidate over the last 40 years, ever since Reagan in 1980. The Department of Education is finally being abolished. The building, as we saw there, is being cleared out, and the mainstream media is reporting on it with such solemnity. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the nation is rejoicing that such a bloated bureaucracy that imposed woke indoctrination to our classrooms, all the while overseeing test scores and the academic standards plummet, is finally being shut down. And yet, as it turns out, this really is just the first step in reclaiming both our classrooms as well as our culture. The relentless onslaught of leftist ideologies on our children continues, from critical race theory to radical gender indoctrination. Our children are bombarded with propaganda that undermines the very timeless values and principles upon which this nation was founded. It's not just the future of our young people that's at stake, gang, because what happens in the classroom always translates into what happens in our culture. This involves nothing less than the future of our nation as well. Ending the Department of Education is one major step in reversing this disaster. However, there's much more that needs to be done to address the roots of the educational crisis we're facing today and restore the values that truly make America great. And that's why today I am so excited to be joined by a dear friend of mine, David Goodwin, an expert on the front lines of educational reform. David is the president of the Association of Classical and Christian Schools, and he's here to share his insights into how we can reclaim our schools and restore sanity to our education system. David, welcome, my friend. Great to see you. It's been far too long.
It has. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
It's my honor. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. You know, for those who don't know, I was in the classical Christian school movement with David for 2 decades. I don't think we had any gray in our beards or our hair at the time, but I knew David when he was just a headmaster, one of the best schools, by the way, in the country, one of the most beautiful buildings, the Ambrose School. But David, I mean, seriously, did you ever imagine we'd see something like this in our lifetimes? I know we often would talk about it in the wee hours, but the Department of Education actually getting abolished?
No, I can't say that was something I envisioned. I know that as far back as the Reagan administration, they had been saying that if a foreign enemy had done to America what the education establishment had, we would declare war. I think that was a quote from one of the Reagan administration's educational documents. But anyway, it is crazy times, but you're keeping track of it. You know what's going on.
Well, right back at you, man. So, I know you would agree with that. This is just the first step. This is where things begin. This is not the final. I mean, you've been on the front lines of the educational battle and the classical renewal for years. In your view, David, what, just perhaps big picture, what's really happening in our schools? How bad was the indoctrination in our classrooms by the secular left?
Well, it's been on a progressive trend, obviously, longer than most people think. When I originally engaged the conversation with Pete Hegseth on the book that we wrote, The Battle for the American Mind, he was, one of his first comments was that when they took prayer out of the schools in the 1960s, things went to pot in the schools. Yeah. And in fact, I said it was much earlier than that. It was in the early part of the 20th century when the progressives seized what we called in our book, the commanding heights of education. And in doing so, they took, it was a term, by the way, that Pete and I borrowed from Lenin, because in the Soviet Union, the original Soviet Union. It was when he was trying to control the economy, it became very difficult for him to control every cost of every apple and razor blade. So he decided the way he would control it was through the commanding heights of the economy, things like railroads and coal and those sorts of steel, major infrastructure. And I think that the progressives borrowed that idea because that's what they did with education in the early part of the 20th century. In the first 2 decades of the 20th century, they seized control of the American education system. Ironically, they considered doing it by forming a Department of Education at the federal level. We all know that it was actually Jimmy Carter who did that. The reason they chose not to go that route was because it was blatantly unconstitutional. Because it was not a power that was vested in the federal government, so it was therefore given to the states. So instead, they built up things like accreditation, teacher certification, teacher licensing, teacher colleges to train the teachers. They controlled all of the elements of education so that they could take education in a very different direction. At first, as Pete and I talked about, the early what they were trying to replace was classical Christian education, which had been the practice prior to 1900 for what, a couple of centuries. You're certainly the expert on that. But what happened was they knew that they couldn't replace the educational system without upsetting parents unless they put something on the pressure plate. We use this example in the book of like a thief in some spy movie stealing a precious diamond and having to replace it on a pressure plate with a piece of cut glass, in that they replaced it with kind of an Americanism. That's when John Dewey and the flag ended up on the, there was a flag in every classroom. George Washington and John Dewey's pictures hung in the front. And it became a way to Americanize children. And who would complain about that? They, of course, had been injecting the Pledge of Allegiance without the under God part in it for quite some time through a socialist named Bellamy, was the guy's name, Francis Bellamy. And so that was the origin of the Pledge of Allegiance, was this coming in. And so, of course, this was a good idea in some small sense, but it was replacing a much bigger idea, the idea of Christianity. So then Pete and I really chronicle how in the last 20 to 40 years, they have converted the education system into a Marxist tool to indoctrinate kids.
Is that how I was just going to ask, how were they able to infiltrate? And it sounds to me like you're saying they basically they infiltrated through the cloak of a civic religion and nationalism.
Exactly. They knew they had to get Christianity out of the classroom, and this was very early on. The movement to start secularizing education started in the 1820s and 1830s, so it was a long time coming. But their purpose all the way along was to remove children from the influence of their parents, because then the state would have influence of them. And if you think about it, it's a feedback loop that gives power to the people in the bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy educates them to vote for them, and then the bureaucracy gets to stay in power. Right.
Wow.
And so it became a giant control point. They owned the commanding heights. They still own the commanding heights, but we're starting to erode it with Trump's actions.
Yeah. What is your hope here? Because I mean, this is kind of stunning. I was always envisioning the classical school movement as being always a parallel institution, part of the parallel economy, but increasingly it looks like the parallel economy is starting to become slowly but surely the mainstream. It's not parallel anymore. It's primary, as it were. What's your hope, David? What do you see for future generations in terms of educational renewal?
Well, my hope and prayer is that in the long term, things that are bad ideas don't work, and things that are good ideas do. Classical Christian education lasted for 2,000 years because it was a very good idea, and it formed the West as we know it. The fact that you and I can speak over a great distance on this video system is testimony to the West and its way of learning. And that was a system that was built on classical Christian education. So I think the hope I have is that it will return stronger than it was before, because there's several things going on right now. Trump is trying to dismantle things at the federal level, but there's a lot of states. Most of the red states have some form of school choice option that they're putting through. And these school choice options have been around in the marketplace for a while, as I'm sure you know, but in this case, they're universal, meaning that all parents can access them, particularly in places like Florida, in Indiana. And so as you know, the Heritage Foundation, I think, is saying that they expect between 11 and 15 states to adopt these things. And if you think about that, the power of being able to choose your own school for parents is going to be a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I've been fascinated seeing Ron DeSantis actually putting explicitly classical education into his speeches and wanting to see that flourish in Florida. Be a beautiful place. To suffering for the Lord in Florida for classical education.
Yeah, he's doing amazing work.
He is. Yeah. I mean, yeah. If Trump is the federal represents the federal revolution, certainly DeSantis seems to have represented the state renaissance, the state rights revolution, as it were. You know, I'm curious about your opinion on this, because I know you've done a lot of study on boys in education and even sort of like the feminization of education. And the importance of forming having an education system that forms faithful young men. And it's just so interesting to see sort of this mass rejection of wokeness and just the political left in general, particularly among young men. In fact, I'm sure you've seen there are reports now that they're actually turning to Christianity now for the first time at even higher rates than young women. We haven't seen that before. It's incredible. I'm just curious, what do you make of that? How can our education continue to foster what appears to be a real recovery of classical manhood?
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. And the obvious one is that we need to start educating boys differently than girls in many respects. Girls do quite well with a system where 25 of them face straight forward and work through a 6-hour day in a classroom. A lot of times the boys need to actually learn by doing a little bit more, and they may need to engage. They need discipline to be able to sit and concentrate, but they also need outlets for the ability to make their own way. I'm excited about some of the work that you're doing, I think, in entrepreneurial education, because I think that's very important for boys. They need to, but there was an internet thing going on not long ago about how boys all need quests.
Yes.
Education should be more of a quest for boys and less of a, jot and tittle kinds of exercise.
Right. I think boys are also particularly attracted to mythos, the great myths, St. George slaying the dragon. I just can't help. I mean, there's just something. I was reading this German commentator actually talking about like Trump, when he walks into the arenas, and they're always like battle arenas, whether it's the UFC or the NCAA wrestling over the weekend. And he's like, well, one said he looks like Caesar coming into the Colosseum with the crowd going crazy and so forth. The Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church was just there yesterday, called him Constantine, a Constantine figure, gave him a cross, and then said, Constantine followed the command, in this sign conquer. And then he gives it to Trump and says, so may you with this sign ever make America, conquering or something. I'm like, what the heck? It's almost like I have read there is sort of a remythologization going on, and that it's common when societies are kind of on the brink and they feel like they're about to lose their culture. And that's when you start to see, like, like the Napoleons or whatever, kind of come up, just very strong leaders, and they have a plausibility because there's this mythos of the need for a slayer of dragons, as it were. Do you see young men particularly attracted to this?
Oh, most certainly. I do think, we are at a moment in time. We should not be complacent, because cultures do one of two things at this juncture. I think we are at an inflection point, and I think that the cultures either fail and disappear. And I know you're even more of a student of history than I am. The number of cultures that are gone because they failed and another culture came in and took over. The alternative is that the people take seriously the import of culture and the import of who and the myths that are underneath their greatness as a civilization, people who believe in themselves as a civilization. Then they can restore it. But it takes more work than I think we realize. And I think that's one of the concerns I have right now, is that there was a great victory back in November, but it was a victory based on in my view, at least, a very good president up against a very weak candidate in Harris. And for us to believe that the battle is won would be like to believe that George Washington, when he crossed the Delaware, won the war. Right.
Right. Good point. Yeah. Beautiful baptismal imagery there, but crossing over, as it were. Yeah. You have, I want to just give a shout out to my favorite conference that I've ever gone to, and that's the Association of Classical Christian Schools Repairing the Ruins conference. You have it in June. I think it's the third week of June. Is this one's in Dallas?
You're so right. Thank you, Steve. Yes, it is. And it's repairingtheruins.org. You can go see about it. It will be another, sometimes people comment about the conference, and I think you would probably affirm that when they go to an education conference, they would not expect to see such energy, and such depth of thought. The depth of thought, the talks there are about education, but it's in a way that you've never really encountered it.
It's mind-blowing because it is you're encountering the recovery of an entire world. I romantically refer to it as a cosmovision. It's just literally the whole world comes into focus in a whole new way that awakens wonder and awe and truth, goodness, and beauty. So, gang, if you are thinking about education for your kids, and you want to maybe dabble a little bit into what this thing of classical education is, which is the education of all of our founding fathers, as David had pointed out, definitely click on the link below and check this conference out. It will blow your mind. Right, Dave? You don't have to be a teacher to go, right? You could just be an inquirer and check it out. No,
a lot of people who enjoy it for this, just for the spiritual aspects of it. It's a deeply Christian look at the world. It's that kingdom, it's that kingdom element that we look at everything as though it were under the dominion, as it is, of Jesus Christ, which is, maybe a little bit trite, but if you dig into it and figure it out, you realize that's a pretty big calling. And so we take it all apart, and we look inside and we figure it out. So I hope people will come, and I hope you'll come back someday and talk on aesthetics. You're my favorite aesthetic.
Oh, I'd love. Yeah, let's chat about that. I'd love to. I miss it. It's so funny. Every third week of June, I always feel a little lonely.
Oh. Well, you know where you can come.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, gang, maybe we'll all do that. Maybe we'll do a meetup this year over in Dallas. But definitely click on that link below. You will not be disappointed. It's one of the most amazing conference. I think it's the most amazing. I go to conferences all the time. This is by far the best conference you will ever go to. It will blow your mind. You will leave there changed. I promise you that. You will leave there changed. Behold, I make all things new, right? So, David, do you have, where can people go to keep up with your work? I know I think you have a, what do you call it? Well, I know you got the X feed, but then what's the thing that you write on?
Yeah.
Why am I forgetting?
Substack. Yes.
Thank you.
So
yes,
you can
I
find
know why
me
I'm
at David
forgetting.
Goodwin .substack.org or .com, and of course on our website at classicalchristian.org. But yeah, I write on Substack. I've continued to write. I've got, soon here I'll have another book out that relates to the one that Pete and I wrote. And so, yeah, I hope we do see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another wonderful resource. David wrote a book with our current Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, on the renewal of classical education. So you want to check that out as well. But definitely click on that link below. Check out Dave's social media profile and keep up with his amazing work. And yeah, go and visit ACCS over the summer. Maybe we can all get together back then as well. David, I miss our gatherings, and yes, we will definitely. I'm going to take you up on that. Maybe I'll surprise you. Maybe I'll interrupt. You got the 3 days or 4 days, including the pre-conference thing. Maybe I'll just interrupt and say, "Hey, Dave," I'll just pal around you the whole time.
As popular as you are these days, I'm not sure we could handle the number of people you'd pull in.
Oh, man. Oh, come on, everybody. Let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah, no, I'm just teasing, of course.
ACCS gets bigger and bigger every year. I mean, it's just amazing. It's just absolutely wonderful. What, just before we go, David, give us I know back in 1994, I think there were 10 classical Christian schools. Am I right? About maybe a
10
dozen
to 25, depending.
10 to 25.
Yeah.
What's the number today?
About 550, and we picked a lot of them up in the last couple of years. The steam is definitely coming up to pressure, and we're getting a lot of school starts constantly. So it's exciting to see that happen. We're kind of a little overwhelmed trying to help them all get going and do it right.
Right. Absolutely. But as gang, as you can see, this is the educational renewal, and you definitely want to be a part of it. David, thank you so much. It's great seeing you again. Great chatting with you. Let's talk soon.
Great. Thanks, Steve.